Great to have you along for the ride. Thanks a lot for stopping by. Glad to have this man back. He's a visiting fellow economics over at the Heritage Foundation. It is Peter St. Peter, how are you? Good to see you.
I'm great. It's great to see you.
Yeah, we just said this to each other. Merry Christmas. We can say that.
That's correct. Yes, we have the blessings now. Soon we will be able to say Happy Mother's Day.
I don't know about that. No, I mean, you have to say happy birthing person's day, I think. Listen, it's great to have you on. It's such a tumultuous time right now. The continuing resolution is continuing something that we already were unhappy about. But not only were they continuing it, they were adding all sorts of pork, and let's rebuild a stadium, and let's send a bunch of money over here for this other thing, and Big Pharma will be protected. Liz Cheney is going to be protected. Going to give ourselves a raise. This thing stunk from day one, or from moment one, didn't it?
It really did. And, Speaker Johnson promised he would not do that. So that's something called an omnibus. When you pack all this crap into there, they had censorship funding. They had biolabs in there. So that's exactly what he promised he would not do. What he claimed he was going to do is a continuing resolution, which is where you take the old spending and you just continue that. Yeah. That is not what happened. Of course, the base went nuts. And I've seen a lot of polls that are aimed at Republican voters. Something like 2 or 3% of people like this thing, overwhelmingly rejected by Republican voters.
Right.
So it looks like for now he's yanked and he's going to put out what's called a clean resolution. Clean means you don't add any stuff onto it.
But I mean, CR should have been clean by definition, if the way you described it is right, and it is. So when he walked out and he said, this is not an omnibus, it's not a mini bus, it's not an anything bus, this is a CR, that just wasn't true.
It wasn't true, and I imagine what's going through his mind is that he wants to push through something that he can get Democrat votes for. What he really wanted to be in there is two things that I think are good. One of them was disaster relief for places like Western North Carolina.
Right.
The other was aid for farmers who've been hit. And the problem is that those two things, if you put those out on their own, that should get like 99 out of 100 in Congress.
Easy.
Like, who's going to oppose that? So what they should have done is dealt with that. They should have actually done that a while ago. Instead, what he did was put those wonderful things, jammed it into this CR, and then he was handing everything, just, like somebody comes over to your house and you give them, oh, hey, you want the furniture? He was giving away everything to try to get those two things. So just tactically, I feel like the guy doesn't know what he's doing.
Well, I'm with you. Either he doesn't know what he's doing or he knows and it's pretty nefarious. I don't think he's a nefarious guy, though. It's Peter St. Go follow him, peterstange.com, or over on X, Prof. St. Onge. So what you just said is completely true. I was actually going to ask you about that. You beat me to the punch. He didn't need to include any of that stuff. Did that in a separate bill that gets passed easily, gets signed by Biden tomorrow. But he put it in there because, as you said, he was adding pet projects here and there, pork here and there, to get the votes that he needed. And all of that just turned away the base that just gave them majorities in the entirety of Congress, in the Supreme Court, and in the executive. So what do you think was the story there? And I think you just said it. Either he doesn't know what he's doing, or did he know what he was doing, and he figured if we get it just till March, then we can renegotiate with all of our majorities.
Yeah, I think Congress does not understand the world that we're in now. So I've dealt with bills where I've been interacting with members of Congress. And generally speaking, you talk to them in private. You sit down in a room, you talk with the staff. If you go public and you complain about what they're doing and they start getting phone calls from constituents, they get angry at you as if you've broken the unspoken rule.
Right.
In other words, Congress is living in this little bubble, their own little world. And in their world, voters do not exist. And if you call out to voters and you say, hey, guys, come here, take a look at this. That's not done in Washington.
Right.
And I think that world was built for them because they were in this mainstream media cocoon, right? The mainstream media, whenever we talk about the uniparty, every single thing that the uniparty wants in the world is what mainstream media wants.
Yes.
They want the wars, they want the welfare, they want the vote buying, they want the gender business, right? That is the world as it existed. That world is gone now. And I think a lot of these guys don't understand that yet. Thanks to Elon and, now DOGE, Department of Government Efficiency, is coordinating a lot of this stuff. Now the voters are judging. They can't hide behind mainstream media anymore. And I don't think they understand that yet. They're going to.
Well, I think X is why the CR went away. I think without X, you don't see the outrage. And so I thank Elon Musk for that for sure. It's Peter St. Onge. Make sure you go follow him everywhere. So if we don't get a CR done or some spending bill, something done by Friday, by tomorrow, the government's going to shut down. Then you always hear, who's to blame for the government shutdown? Well, my answer is always this. If the House of Representatives presents a spending bill to the Senate and the Senate doesn't pass it, it's on the Senate. If the Senate does pass it and the president doesn't sign it, it's on the president. But when we talk about a government shutdown, I had Ted Poe on yesterday, who's a former representative. He said it doesn't really shut down the government. 2/3 of the government continues, 1/3 doesn't get funded, and we'll be okay. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, so in terms of consequences, that's exactly it. There's something called the Washington Monument Strategy, which is where whenever it's time to cut funding, you cut the most popular stuff. You never ever cut all the crap that none of your voters wanted, right? You cut the national parks, the Washington Monument, you lay off the firefighters, right? You always go with the most popular spending. So that's absolutely what they're going to do. They're going to try to maximize the pain to teach voters a lesson, never cut our budget again. But fundamentally, everything that matters, the military, the water supply, all the things they're going to pull out to try to scare you, all of that stuff continues. And, sort of zooming out, like going back to that conversation about what happened in the mainstream media, in the old days, there was this real kind of a knife fight over who's going to get blamed for this thing, because it was always sort of dancing like a beauty contest for media. Like, how can I shape this narrative that, we did this and then the other guy said no, and then that wasn't really fair. I think it's a whole new world now where, one of my favorite expressions is never explain, your friends don't need it, your enemies won't believe you. Right. In this case, it doesn't matter who pulled out the deal first. Did we have a deal? Did we have an understanding? No, the Republican voters want a smaller government, and they don't care the blame game. That was the old mainstream media world. I think that world is gone.
Here's the argument now, Peter, and you probably have seen this back and forth. My congressional district representative is Chip Roy. Chip Roy is a very conservative guy. He's a fiscal guy who wants to end spending, lower spending. He and Trump now are at odds right now because Chip Roy doesn't want to raise the debt ceiling at all. Trump said, do a clean CR, let the debt ceiling go up a little bit until March, then we'll fix it. Roy is trying to dig in and say, I don't want to do that. Now Trump is going to primary him and everybody's mad at each other. So who's right about this? Does there necessarily have to be, even if it's a clean CR, does there have to be an increase in the debt ceiling to make that happen? And if so, why? How is that clean then?
Yeah, I mean, personally, I love the debt limit. I think it's one of the greatest things in our republic.
If we use it.
I would like them to actually obey it.
Right.
They would have to bring the deficit down to zero. So, I don't like criticizing either of those guys. I like Chip. Of course, I like the president. But personally, I would just go with clean resolution. And if anything, keep that debt ceiling. Put it on a shining pedestal. Respect it. Never break it again.
Well, the problem is, though, Professor, you've got Kevin McCarthy, who walked in and negotiated this piece of garbage with Biden, and Biden rolled him easily. And he walked out not only with no debt ceiling, or not only with a cap that was higher than we wanted, but there really isn't any debt ceiling. He walked out, and over the 6 years, or over the whatever years it was that he negotiated, there was no real limit to where you can say, okay, Pags, the ceiling is this number. There really isn't a number. It's sort of floating. So why does that matter now if you're going to get something clean and lower spending and DOGE can start doing things by March? Does this tie the hands of lowering spending if we say leave the debt ceiling to rise a little bit by March? I'm not a debt ceiling. I don't want more debt. I'm completely with you and with Chip. But I understand what Trump is saying. Let's make the deal. We can fix it in March. Does that make sense or not?
Yeah, I think what Trump's trying to do, first of all, he doesn't want a debt ceiling to go down on his watch. Okay. Right. So he's kind of got an eye on the scorecard. And secondly, a debt ceiling, to a certain degree, the other party can squeeze you, right? Because you need their votes in order to pass. Otherwise, going back to the old script, the mainstream media is going to blame you because the Washington Monument is closed.
Right.
But I do think it's a different world on that. I think what GOP voters want, and in fact, what independent voters want, I think as well, is they want them to stand their ground, shrink the darn government. Yeah. And I think, guys like you and I can explain how the Washington Monument strategy works, right? We can explain that all this pain, they're going to try to delay the Social Security checks, right? All of that cynical stuff where they're trying to squeeze you, they're trying to draw blood. We can explain that now. We don't need mainstream media for it. So personally, I would rather just go with it. The Dems try to squeeze, and you squeeze right back come March.
Is it going to shut down, do you think?
I don't think it will. Congress is a master of last minute brinkmanship. Even if it does, you know, they're going to do the cosmetic things first, and then we'll end up paying generally historically something like $4 billion that it costs us to have it quote unquote closed for a couple of weeks. I don't think it will close, but again, I could be surprised. Maybe Elon Doge, Trump himself has steel body parts that could actually push this thing, over into another shutdown. Now, the last time we had that, I think that was a couple weeks. It wasn't catastrophic for the country. I think it'd actually be useful to start sort of signaling that we're serious this time.
Prof. St. Onge over on X. Go to peterstantonge.com. It is expert economist and great guy, Peter St. Onge. When it comes to you keep calling them mainstream, and that's fine. I call them legacy. I think I'm more mainstream now than they are, but the legacy media is holding on by its fingertips if they can. But they lost yesterday, big time. Everything they said was completely contradicted by people like you and me over on X, and we won. So I love that we have that power now. But they're going to now go on every outlet they can and say, Grandma won't get her Social Security check. The National Guard's not going to be paid. Children won't get the care they need in nursing home, in nursery schools. I mean, we're going to hear pre-K is going to end and no education in America. They're going to lie their faces off. What do you have to say to those who are watching and listening to calm that down? They're lying. It's okay. It's all going to be retroactive no matter how long they close it anyway. We're going to be fine.
Yeah. By the way, I love legacy media. I actually like leftover media as well, but either of those.
I like that even better, yeah.
Work. And you're right. They'll absolutely do that. They'll scaremonger. And as you say, right, the key is, number one, every time the government shuts down, it is very, very easy to go back and pay everything back.
Right.
Secondly, just the absolute key to understand that there is so much tax revenue that comes in every single month. They can cover the essentials. They can cover the stuff that people actually want. They can cover the Social Security checks. They can cover the Washington Monument. They can cover all the things you want, search and rescue, things like that, the children getting the meals. However, there's not enough to cover the things that people don't actually want. So like the foreign wars and things like this. So I think it's absolutely essential that mainstream media is going to roll that one out again. It has terrified Republicans for decades. That's why Republicans always rolled over on the debt limit, is because they were living in fear that CNN and New York Times were going to make those exact arguments. They will roll them out again, dust them out, bring them out of the warehouse, put those up on air. It's absolutely essential for us to explain to people that there's plenty of money for the stuff you want. Right, because remember, even if the government quote unquote shuts down because of the debt limit, they can still spend plenty of stuff. They just can't borrow. So they can take all those tax revenues coming in. They can still, buy all the things that voters actually want. What they can't buy is all the extra crap we don't want. So the message there is, Janet Yellen, all the rest of them, keep your eye on the ball, keep providing things that voters actually want, and defund the controversial stuff. By the way, the stuff that's at issue in this kind of negotiation to begin with.
It is Peter St. Onge. Go to peterstantonge.com. President Trump wants lending to start happening again. In this country, it's hard to borrow money. If you can borrow money, the interest rate is way too high. Generally speaking, it's really hard to borrow money right now. He wants to flood the economy with lending. What does that look like, and can he do it?
Yeah, so in terms of growth, he can absolutely do that. Partly he can do it through deregulation, and then partly he can do it because if inflation comes down, then interest rates can come down, right? If interest rates come down, it's cheaper to get a mortgage, cheaper to borrow money. So he can absolutely do that. The risk here is that if banks start lending out a lot more money, right, whether it's to business or whether it's to households for things like mortgage, that is going to lead to inflation unless we can dramatically cut government spending. So that's kind of the play that the Federal Reserve has done over the past couple of years, is that they jacked up rates to squeeze families and squeeze business spending so that the feds could spend everything they want. Think of it like taking a bulldozer to a highway. Okay, you knock off all the private cars and now the president can drive fast. All right, that's what happened under Biden. What needs to happen under Trump is the opposite. Get government spending down. That way you can have a lot more cars on the highway and you're not going to get a traffic jam, meaning inflation.
No, I got you. That's a very good explanation. You and I have talked about this before. They also flooded the market with dollar bills, with 20s, with hundreds, with currency. And I think I asked you this before, and your answer was so good I want to hear it again. Can we now start taking some of that currency out of the economy? And the reason why, of course, as you know, if I've got a $20 bill in my pocket and they print off, 500 billion new $20 bills, what I have in my pocket has less value. If we start taking some of the currency out of the market, does that add value back to the money that we have? In essence, lowering inflation, then our money goes farther.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So you can, the Fed normally prints money, and then that's kind of like pouring water into the wine. So all of the other dollars in existence buy less because there's more dollars chasing the goods.
Right.
You can absolutely reverse that. The easiest way to do it is something called quantitative tightening, which the Fed has been doing, which is where they simply sell off assets. Okay, so the Fed has all this government debt, they have mortgage debt. They sell that, they get dollars in return, and then they literally cancel the dollars. So that's the fastest way to do that. You've got something like $7 trillion sitting there on the Fed's balance sheet, right, which are dollars that they've printed. So they literally sit there with an Excel sheet and they type a bunch of zeros and then they say, okay, this is money, and then they use that to go buy something.
Well, why can't we do that? I want to do that. I want to add some zeros.
That's why it pays to be a central banker. That's absolutely right. So. You are a licensed counterfeiter. Good work if you can get it.
So instead of quantitative easing, they do quantitative tightening.
Bingo. You do tightening. You take all those assets that the Fed has, you pawn those off into the market. You take the dollars, you cancel the dollars. You could cancel $7 trillion that way. That would be equivalent to roughly 30% reduction in prices. So in other words, you would get massive deflation. Put differently, if they sell off $1 trillion a year, they could cancel off any other inflation out there.
We got about 30 seconds left with Professor St. Onge. Just a quick answer to this, if you don't mind. Can he replace income tax with tariffs? I know it's a deep and dark, issue. Just yes or no on that, do you think?
Yes, but you would need to massively cut federal spending.
And that's something that's going to be resisted big time.
It's going to be resisted big time by the Washington establishment, the special interests who bought all that spending. The people would absolutely love it. You look at polls. So there was a recent CNBC poll. They found 75 to 80% of Americans want massive cuts in Washington. That's including half of Kamala voters. Wow. So the voters want him to get rid of the Washington spending, cut it by, say, $2 trillion. At that point, you could have very tiny little tariffs and you could still fund the entire thing and get rid of the income tax. That's exactly what I hope happens. But that is going to take some strong choices from Trump. It's going to take, people like Elon. It's going to take a big push.
Half of the Kamala voters actually voted against their own interest. Imagine that. It is Peter St. Onge. Go to Prof. St. Onge over on X. Go to his website. Really appreciate the time. And again, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year if we don't talk to you.
Merry Christmas, Joe.
All right, brother. We'll talk soon. We're back after this. Stay right here.